At 6:14 a.m. local time on a cold morning over the Black Sea, a formation of over 200 Ukrainian drones crossed into Russian-controlled airspace above the Krasnodar region, split into coordinated attack waves, and struck the Novorossiysk naval base with a level of precision and devastation that senior defense officials are now calling the single most consequential strike against a Russian naval installation since the Second World War. What happened in the hours that followed did not just damage ships. It broke something that cannot be repaired. It broke the illusion that Russia's Black Sea Fleet still exists as a functioning combat force, and it forced a decision in Ankara that may redraw the strategic map of southeastern Europe for the next 50 years. What you are about to hear has not been explained clearly anywhere else. The headlines will tell you that ships were hit. They will tell you that fires burned. But the part that is being buried, the dimension of this crisis that no one is connecting, is what Turkey did in response, what it means for the Montreux Convention, what it signals to NATO, and why Russia now faces a strategic catastrophe in the Black Sea that has nothing to do with missiles and everything to do with geography, law, and a 90-year-old treaty that Vladimir Putin can no longer exploit. To understand what just happened, it is necessary to understand what the Black Sea actually means. This is not an abstract body of water on a distant map. The Black Sea carries approximately 3 million barrels of oil every single day, representing roughly 3% of total global supply, mostly produced in Russia, Azerbaijan, and Kazakhstan. It is the transit corridor for enormous volumes of iron, steel, and agricultural products moving from the Black Sea coast to European and global markets. Control of the Black Sea is control of energy flow to southern Europe, control of grain shipments that feed tens of millions of people across the Middle East and North Africa, and control of a maritime corridor that connects Russia's southern military infrastructure to the Mediterranean through a single choke point, the Turkish Straits. The Bosporus and Dardanelles, controlled entirely by Turkey under the 1936 Montreux Convention, represent the only passage between the Black Sea and the open ocean. Every warship, every submarine, every vessel of military significance that enters or exits the Black Sea must pass through Turkish territorial waters under Turkish authority. This has been the case for 90 years. And for 90 years, Russia has treated this arrangement as manageable because Turkey, despite being a NATO member since 1952, maintained a careful balancing act between Moscow and the Western Alliance. That balancing act is now over. And what ended it was not diplomacy. It was 200 drones, 5 burning warships, and a Russian fleet that no longer has anywhere to hide. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. As of early 2026, approximately 30% of the Russian Black Sea Fleet's combat assets have been destroyed or seriously damaged by Ukrainian strikes. The flagship cruiser Moskva, a 12,490-ton Slava-class guided missile cruiser carrying 16 P-1000 Vulcan anti-ship missiles, was sunk on April 14, 2022. The landing ships Saratov, Novocherkassk, and Caesar Kunikov were destroyed. The minesweeper Ivan Golubets was struck during the first large-scale Ukrainian naval drone attack on Sevastopol Bay, with a direct hit to its hull, triggering an onboard fire that degraded its specialized radar and mine countermeasure equipment beyond repair. The patrol ship Sergei Kotov, a brand-new Project 2160 vessel commissioned in 2022, was sunk by Magura V-5 maritime drones in March 2024. The missile corvette Cyclone was destroyed. The intelligence ship Ivan Kurs was damaged. The list continues, and it continues in one direction only. But the strike that changed everything came on April 5th and 6th, 2026. A combined operation involving over 200 drones, including both aerial one-way attack, unmanned aerial vehicles, and maritime surface drones, targeted Novorossiysk, the principal base to which Russia had relocated its Black Sea Fleet after Ukrainian strikes made Sevastopol untenable. The minesweeper Valentin Pikul sank. 2 anti-submarine warfare ships, Yeysk and Kasimov, sustained significant damage to their hulls and propulsion systems. The frigate Admiral Makarov, one of the most technologically capable surface combatants remaining in the Black Sea Fleet, suffered critical damage to its superstructure and Caliber cruise missile launchers. A second frigate, likely the Admiral Essen, was struck in a follow-up attack and sustained damage that defense analysts describe as potentially mission-ending. The loss of Valentin Pikul degraded the base's mine countermeasure capability in Novorossiysk. The damage to Yeysk and Kasimov further reduced Russia's ability to counter unmanned surface vehicles, increasing the vulnerability of every remaining ship. The damage to Admiral Makarov cut especially deep because this frigate, equipped with both Steel-1 air defense and Caliber cruise missile systems, represented one of the fleet's last credible power projection platforms. Without it, the Black Sea Fleet's capacity to conduct offensive missile strikes against Ukrainian targets from naval platforms dropped to near zero. And here's the part that no one is telling you. The Russian Black Sea Fleet did not just lose ships. It lost its last safe harbor. Novorossiysk, the port to which the fleet retreated when Sevastopol became a kill zone, is now itself a kill zone. The strategy of hiding in a closed base, which Russian naval commanders adopted after the loss of Sevastopol, no longer works. Ukrainian drone technology, including the Magura V5 maritime drone capable of speeds exceeding 50 knots, the Sea Baby underwater drone capable of striking submerged targets, and the new Cossack Mamai surface drone measuring 6 meters in length with speeds reaching 110 kilometers per hour, has rendered every port on Russia's Black Sea coast vulnerable to precision attack. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell, because what happened next is something that defense analysts have been predicting for 2 years and that Russia has been desperately trying to prevent. It involves Turkey. It involves NATO, and it involves a decision that was made not in Moscow and not in Kiev, but in Ankara, that Russia cannot reverse, cannot negotiate around, and cannot solve with military force. To understand why Turkey's response matters more than the drone strikes themselves, it is necessary to understand the Montreux Convention and why it has been the single most important legal document governing military power in the Black Sea for 9 decades. The Montreux Convention was signed on July 20th, 1936 at the Montreux Palace in Switzerland. It replaced the earlier Treaty of Lausanne's provisions regarding the Turkish Straits and restored full Turkish sovereignty over the Bosporus and the Dardanelles. Under Montreux, commercial ships of all nations can sail freely through the straits in peacetime. But military vessels face strict regulations. Non-littoral states, meaning countries that do not border the Black Sea, are subject to aggregate tonnage limits of 45,000 tons, with no single non-Black Sea power permitted more than 2/3 of that figure. Warships of non-littoral states cannot remain in the Black Sea for more than 21 days. Black Sea states, including Russia, face fewer restrictions, but are still bound by notification requirements and specific transit rules. The critical provision is Article 19, which governs wartime transit. When Turkey determines that a state of war exists involving Black Sea littoral states, it has the authority to close the straits to belligerent naval vessels. On March 1st, 2022, shortly after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Turkey declared that a state of war existed and invoked Article 19, closing the straits to Russian and Ukrainian naval vessels. This meant that Russia could not transfer replacement warships into the Black Sea from other fleets. Every ship destroyed by Ukrainian strikes was a ship that could not be replaced. The Moskva, displaced at 12,490 tons, was irreplaceable. The frigates, the corvettes, the landing ships, all irreplaceable for the duration of hostilities. This created a ratchet effect that military strategists call a one-way degradation spiral. Every Ukrainian strike reduced Russian naval capability in the Black Sea permanently. Russia could not bring in reinforcements. It could not rotate damaged ships out for repair at facilities outside the Black Sea. It could only absorb losses and watch its fleet shrink. And shrink it did, from a force capable of projecting power across the eastern Mediterranean to a collection of damaged vessels huddled in port, unable to venture into open water without risking destruction by swarms of unmanned surface vehicles. But Turkey's invocation of Montreux was, until recently, framed as a neutral measure. Ankara closed the straits to all belligerent warships, not just Russian ones. Turkey maintained its careful balancing act, supplying Bayraktar TB2 drones to Ukraine while purchasing Russian S-400 air defense systems, opposing the invasion while refusing to join Western sanctions, condemning Moscow's territorial violations while preserving billions of dollars in bilateral trade. That balance has shifted. And it shifted because of something that happened not in the Black Sea, but in a conference room in Warsaw, and then again in Dubrovnik. In April 2025, at the 10th summit of the Three Seas Initiative, Turkey was formally accepted as a strategic partner of the organization. The Three Seas Initiative, originally a forum of 12 European Union member states situated between the Baltic, Adriatic, and Black Seas, was conceived as a platform for infrastructure cooperation. But in the context of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it has transformed into something far more significant: a coordinated framework for reducing European dependence on Russian energy, transport, and logistics networks. Its 143 priority projects span energy, transport, and digital infrastructure, with estimated funding requirements exceeding 500 billion euros through 2030. Turkey's accession as a strategic partner alongside Spain, the United States, Germany, Japan, and the European Commission was not a symbolic gesture. It was a strategic realignment. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan attended the 11th summit in Dubrovnik in April 2026, presenting Turkey as a critical hub for trade and energy routes connecting Europe with the Black Sea, the Caucasus, Central Asia, and the Middle East. Fidan referenced the Middle Corridor, a rail and logistics route connecting China and Europe through Kazakhstan, the Caspian Sea, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey. He referenced the Development Road, a planned rail and road link from Iraq's Gulf Coast through Turkey to Europe. Both projects represent infrastructure investments designed to bypass Russian-controlled routes. For Russian strategic planners, this was alarming. A Russian analyst at Crimean Federal University stated publicly that Turkey joining the Three Seas initiative represented a fundamental change in the balance of power on the Black Sea. The analyst noted that the initiative, originally conceived to deter both Russia and Germany, had evolved into a broad European anti-Russian bloc, and that Turkey's participation meant Ankara was no longer balancing between Moscow and the West. Turkey was choosing, but here is where it gets truly extraordinary, and this is the part that most coverage is missing entirely. The Montreux Convention contains a rolling 5-year amendment deadline. Under the treaty's provisions, any signatory seeking amendments must submit proposed changes by August 2026 for a revised treaty to be agreed upon by November 9, 2026. This deadline, which arrives in less than 3 months, has created a window of geopolitical pressure that did not exist even 6 months ago. Consider what this means in practical terms. Turkey controls the straits. Turkey has invoked Montreux to close the straits to belligerent warships since 2022. Turkey has now aligned itself with a European infrastructure and security initiative explicitly designed to reduce dependence on Russia. And Turkey is approaching a treaty amendment deadline that could allow fundamental restructuring of the rules governing military transit through the most strategically significant choke point in southeastern Europe. Russia's Black Sea Fleet, already degraded to roughly 70% of its pre-invasion combat strength, cannot be reinforced. It cannot be rotated. It cannot be repaired outside the Black Sea theater. Every remaining combat-capable vessel is confined to ports that are under constant threat from Ukrainian drone attack. The fleet that once projected power from Sevastopol to the Syrian port of Tartus, that launched Caliber cruise missiles at Ukrainian cities from maritime platforms, that enforced a grain blockade affecting food supplies for hundreds of millions of people across the developing world, that fleet now struggles to leave port without risking destruction. The Russian Navy's commander of the Black Sea Fleet, Sergei Pinchuk, reportedly faces removal after repeated failures to stop Ukrainian naval drone attacks. Russian military command has been scrambling to shore up defenses at Novorossiysk, installing camouflage nets, additional surveillance cameras, and floating barriers. But these are defensive measures against offensive innovation. Ukrainian drone technology continues to advance. The Sea Baby underwater drone, capable of operating beneath the surface where conventional defenses cannot intercept it, represents a capability that Russia has no proven countermeasure against. The Magura V5 maritime drone has been refined through dozens of combat deployments into a mature weapons platform with demonstrated kill capability against warships many times its size. Make sure you subscribe to this channel right now, because this story is developing faster than any news cycle can track, and the next phase of what is unfolding in the Black Sea will determine the strategic map of the entire region for decades to come. Now let us examine the internal dynamics within the Russian defense establishment, because what is happening inside the Kremlin's military planning circles reveals a level of institutional dysfunction that mirrors the physical destruction of the fleet itself. The Russian Black Sea Fleet was considered to have been founded on May 13, 1783, when 11 ships of the Azov flotilla, under the command of Vice Admiral Klokachev, entered Akhtiar Bay in the southwest part of the Crimean Peninsula. For 243 years, the Black Sea Fleet has been a symbol of Russian power projection southward, a naval force that fought in the Russo-Turkish War of 1787 to 1791, the Crimean War of 1853 to 1856, both world wars, and that was intended to secure Russian dominance of the warm water passage to the Mediterranean for generations to come. The emotional and institutional investment in this fleet cannot be overstated. It is not merely a collection of warships. It is a cornerstone of Russian strategic identity, the embodiment of Catherine the Great's vision of a southern maritime empire. Losing it is not a military setback. It is a civilizational humiliation. And that humiliation is being felt in specific personal ways within the Russian military command structure. Reports indicate that Russian military leadership has been weighing the removal of Black Sea Fleet Chief Sergei Pinchuk after repeated failures to stop Ukrainian naval drone attacks. Pinchuk inherited a fleet already in crisis, but his tenure has been marked by a series of defensive failures that Russian military bloggers and Telegram channels have described in terms ranging from disappointed to contemptuous. The installation of camouflage nets over vessels at Novorossiysk, the deployment of additional surveillance cameras along the port perimeter, the traffic congestion caused by security checkpoints at supply roads leading into the base, these are the hallmarks of a military force in survival mode, not combat mode. The events of recent weeks have demonstrated that the strategy of hiding in a closed base is not merely ineffective. It is, as one Russian military analyst stated, disastrous. The fleet finds itself trapped in a paradox of its own making. Moving into open water means exposure to drone attack, and staying in port means vulnerability to mass drone swarms that overwhelm harbor defenses. There is no position on the board that offers safety. The institutional consequences of this failure extend beyond the Navy. The Russian Defense Ministry allocated approximately $6 billion to naval procurement and maintenance in its 2025 budget cycle. A significant portion of that allocation was directed toward Black Sea Fleet operations and the development of countermeasures against Ukrainian unmanned systems. Those investments have not produced results commensurate with their cost. The contrast between Russian defense spending and Ukrainian strike effectiveness creates a ratio of destruction that military economists find staggering. A Magura V-5 maritime drone costs an estimated $250,000 to produce, while the frigate Admiral Makarov, which it helped damage beyond operational recovery, cost approximately $500 million to build and decades to design, construct, and commission. The mathematics of asymmetric warfare have never been demonstrated more vividly. This brings us to the diplomatic dimension, and specifically to what China has been doing while Russia's position in the Black Sea has collapsed. Beijing has been watching the Black Sea situation with the intensity of a chess grandmaster studying an opponent's losing endgame. Chinese naval planners have been consuming every piece of open-source intelligence about Ukrainian drone operations, analyzing the tactics, the technologies, the defensive countermeasures that failed, and the command and control architectures that succeeded. The reason is obvious. The Taiwan Strait is roughly 130 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. The Black Sea is roughly 1,100 kilometers across at its widest. If unmanned surface vehicles can neutralize a major naval fleet in a body of water the size of the Black Sea, the implications for any future conflict in the confined waters around Taiwan are profound and deeply concerning for Chinese strategic planners. But China's engagement with the Black Sea crisis extends beyond passive observation. Chinese energy companies have been quietly expanding their positions in Central Asian oil and gas production, developing pipeline and transport infrastructure that reduces dependence on Russian transit routes. The Middle Corridor rail link, which Turkey has been promoting through the Three Seas initiative, connects Chinese markets to Europe through Kazakhstan, the Caspian Sea, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, completely bypassing Russian territory. Chinese cargo volumes on this route have been increasing steadily, with transit times of approximately 15 days between Western China and European markets, compared to 17 to 20 days via the traditional northern rail routes through Russia. For Russia, this represents an economic flanking maneuver that compounds the military disaster in the Black Sea. Moscow has positioned itself as the essential transit corridor between Asia and Europe, the bridge between Chinese manufacturing capacity and European consumer markets. If Turkey, through the Three Seas initiative and the Middle Corridor, establishes itself as the primary hub for East-West trade, Russia loses not only its Black Sea naval dominance, but also its geographic relevance as a continental connector. The economic and strategic isolation would be comprehensive. The energy dimension is equally devastating. Russia's oil exports through Novorossiysk include shipments through the Caspian Pipeline Consortium terminal, which handles approximately 1.4 million barrels per day of crude oil, primarily from Kazakhstan's massive Tengiz and Kashagan fields. The terminal's shareholders include Chevron with a 15% stake, ExxonMobil with a 7.5% stake, and Kazmuni Gas, the Kazakh national oil company. Every Ukrainian drone strike on Novorossiysk port infrastructure threatens not just Russian revenue, but the energy security calculations of multiple nations and the financial interests of major Western oil companies. The April 6, 2026 strike on port facilities, verified through video showing fires at dock berths, created immediate disruption to loading operations and raised insurance premiums for tankers operating in the area. The insurance market response alone tells a significant story. Major insurers have progressively expanded the war risk zone in the Black Sea since 2022, increasing premiums for vessels operating in waters that were once considered routine commercial transit lanes. Each Ukrainian strike on port infrastructure further elevates risk assessments, adding costs that ultimately flow through to global energy prices and consumer costs worldwide. A single disrupted loading day at Novorossiysk translates to approximately $140 million in delayed revenue, calculated at prevailing crude prices applied to the terminal's daily throughput capacity. Russia attempted to develop its own unmanned surface vehicle capability to counter Ukraine's maritime drone advantage. According to a Ukrainian defense advisor, Russian developers produced operational prototypes by mid-2025 and conducted attacks using naval drones near the Danube Delta. The year 2026 was planned as the year Russia would begin widespread use of unmanned surface vehicles in the Black Sea. Those plans were derailed by the shutdown of Starlink satellite communications access in early 2026. Russian forces had been relying on unauthorized access to Starlink terminals obtained through third-party supply chains to support battlefield communications and drone operations. When that access was cut, Russia's maritime drone program lost the satellite communication backbone it needed to operate effectively at range. The asymmetry deepened. Ukraine maintained its drone capability, while Russia lost its ability to compete in the domain Ukraine had pioneered. This brings us to the most consequential dimension of the crisis, the one that connects every thread into a single strategic picture. Turkey does not merely control the straits. Turkey possesses the longest coastline of any Black Sea nation. Turkey operates the largest and most capable navy in the region. Turkey has been a NATO member for over 70 years. And Turkey, having watched Russia's Black Sea fleet degrade from a dominant force to a collection of damaged vessels hiding in port, has recognized something that defense analysts at Chatham House, the Atlantic Council, and multiple NATO strategic planning centers have been writing about for the past year. The balance of power in the Black Sea has shifted decisively, and it has shifted in Turkey's favor. In 2016, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan publicly lamented that the Black Sea had become a Russian lake and advocated for greater NATO presence in the region. That statement reflected a reality in which Russia's Black Sea fleet was the dominant naval force, unchallenged and expanding. 10 years later, the Russian fleet has been driven from open water by a country that technically does not possess a navy. Ukraine, operating exclusively through unmanned systems, surface drones, underwater drones, and aerial drones, has accomplished what no conventional naval force in the region could. It has broken Russian naval dominance in the Black Sea. For Turkey, this represents an opportunity that comes perhaps once in a century. The Montreux Convention, which Turkey guards jealously as the legal foundation of its sovereignty over the Straits, also constrains Turkey by preventing NATO allies from maintaining a permanent naval presence in the Black Sea. Non-literal NATO states like the United States, the United Kingdom, and France face strict tonnage limits and 21-day residency caps under Montreux. This has prevented the Western alliance from establishing the kind of sustained naval presence that could permanently check Russian ambitions. But if Russia's Black Sea fleet is no longer a credible force, the strategic calculus changes. Turkey no longer needs the Montreux framework to protect itself against Russian naval power, because that naval power has been effectively neutralized by Ukrainian drones. What Turkey needs now is the diplomatic flexibility to position itself as the dominant maritime power in the Black Sea, the essential hub connecting European, Middle Eastern, and Central Asian trade routes, and the NATO ally whose geographic position makes it indispensable to alliance security on the southeastern flank. The historical parallel here is unavoidable and instructive. In 1988, during the Iran-Iraq War, Iran attempted to disrupt shipping in the Persian Gulf through mine-laying and attacks on oil tankers. The United States responded with Operation Praying Mantis, the largest surface naval engagement since the Second World War at that time, sinking or damaging half of Iran's operational fleet in a single day. The lesson was clear. Testing American resolve in a strategic waterway produces catastrophic results for the challenger. But the Black Sea in 2026 offers a different and perhaps more consequential lesson. Ukraine, a country that lost its navy almost entirely when Russia seized Crimean naval facilities in 2014, rebuilt an asymmetric maritime strike capability from scratch using technology that did not exist in operational form 5 years ago. The Magura V5, developed by Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Directorate, is a maritime drone measuring approximately 5.5 meters in length, propelled by a jet ski engine, capable of carrying a warhead of up to 300 kilograms, and operated via satellite link at ranges exceeding 800 kilometers. It costs a fraction of what a conventional anti-ship missile costs and can be produced in quantities that overwhelm any point defense system. The Sea Baby, an even more revolutionary platform, operates beneath the surface, evading radar detection entirely and exploiting the fundamental vulnerability of every surface vessel, the hull below the waterline. The December 2025 attack on a Kylo-class submarine at Novorossiysk, conducted by a Sea Baby underwater drone, demonstrated that even submerged platforms are not immune. Satellite imagery analyzed by open-source intelligence researchers showed concrete debris on the pier and indications of a detonation approximately 20 meters from the submarine's stern, close enough to affect the submerged propulsion section.